clash of titans, King Kong versus the ancient Megalodon. The ocean was restless, waves rising like jagged walls beneath the moonlight. When the colossal figure of King Kong stood at the shore, staring into the endless abyss. From beneath the black waters, the legendary Megalodon stirred, a predator that had ruled the deep for millions of years, its shadow stretching wider than ships, its teeth glinting like a saw of death. The battle was inevitable, a clash of two titans, one of land and one of sea, destined to carve their fury into legend. The roar of King Kong thundered across the waves, shaking seabirds into flight, his chest pounding like a war drum, challenging the unseen beast lurking below. In answer, the Megalodon surged upward, splitting the waves with a monstrous tail, its dorsal fins slicing the surface like a blade. The ocean boiled with its arrival. And for the first time in ages, the king of the land faced the king of the sea, eye to eye across the stormy divide. With a crash of fury, Megalodon launched from the depths, jaws wide, rows of teeth glistening, each large enough to crush stone. But King Kong, with reflexes honed in countless battles, dodged aside, his massive fist crashing against the shark's snout, sending ripples across the sea. The water exploded with foam as predator and primate collided, strength against speed, fury against hunger. The sea churned violently as Megalodon circled, its massive shadow vanishing into the abyss. King Kong waded chest-deep, beating his chest and roaring, daring the Leviathan to strike again. Beneath the surface, the shark's eyes glowed with ancient malice. And with a whip of its tail, it surged upward once more, jaws aimed for Kong's legs. This time the bite landed, teeth tearing into Kong's thigh, blood staining the water crimson. The titan howled in pain. But instead of retreating, King Kong seized the beast's upper jaw with one hand and the lower jaw with the other, muscles straining against the unholy force of the ocean's tyrant. For a moment, it was as if the entire ocean held its breath, watching predator and giant locked in primal contest. But Megalodon twisted violently, dragging King Kong underwater. The titan roared bubbles into the depths as darkness swallowed him, his fists hammering against the shark's armored head. Coral reefs shattered beneath their struggle, and schools of fish scattered like sparks before a wildfire. The abyss became their battlefield. Megalodon drove Kong deeper, hoping to drown the land-born giant. But Kong's rage only grew. Grabbing a jagged boulder from the ocean floor, he slammed it against the shark's snout, breaking off teeth as long as swords. The beast reeled, blood mixing with the salt water. But its hunger was endless. They rose back toward the surface in a spiral of violence, water foaming around them like a storm born from fury. With a titanic leap, Megalodon erupted from the sea, dragging King Kong with it, the two monsters soaring into the air before crashing down with an impact that sent waves racing to distant shores. Gasping for air, King Kong climbed onto a jagged rock formation, blood dripping down his leg, his chest heaving. But the respite was brief. Megalodon, angered and relentless, slammed its tail against the rocks, shattering stone, nearly toppling Kong back into the sea. The titan roared in defiance, his fists pounding against the crumbling cliffs, daring the shark to rise once more. The sea exploded as Megalodon lunged, jaws snapping. But King Kong leapt, both fists smashing down on its skull. The impact thundered like a quake, cracking the ancient predator's scales. Yet even wounded, the shark whipped its head, knocking Kong into the waves. Blood and salt mixed as the battle raged on, each strike a symphony of violence echoing through the abyss. Beneath the surface once more, Megalodon coiled around Kong, its massive body crushing like a serpent, bones straining beneath the pressure. But Kong's roar vibrated through the water, primal and unstoppable. With one desperate motion, he seized a jagged tooth lodged in his thigh, ripping it free and plunging it into the shark's eye. The ocean filled with a screech that was not human, not animal, but something ancient and enraged. Blinded in one eye, Megalodon thrashed wildly, smashing coral reefs, stirring whirlpools of destruction. King Kong, battered and bleeding, swam upward through the chaos, hauling himself onto a shattered reef. He pounded his chest again, defiance burning brighter than pain. The shark circled below, one eye glowing with hate, unwilling to yield the sea to any creature. With a surge, Megalodon burst from the water again. But King Kong met it midair, both fists hammering into its jaw. Teeth snapped like broken glass, blood spraying across the sky before both crashed down again, shaking the sea like thunder. Neither predator nor primate could claim victory, not yet. The storm above mirrored the storm below, lightning crackling as if the gods themselves watched the duel. King Kong roared into the thunder, his voice echoing with defiance, while Megalodon's tail rose from the water like a tower, crashing down to create waves that swallowed entire islets. Their fury reshaped the ocean itself, their battle more like an earthquake than a fight. Every clash brought blood. King Kong's body was torn with deep gashes, quills of broken coral stuck into his flesh. While Megalodon's scales were cracked, its jaw bleeding, one eye blinded. Yet neither would stop. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a war for dominance, the crown of the world itself. On and on the battle raged, wave against roar, tooth against fist, fury against endurance. Hours seemed to pass. Though in truth it was only moments, each second stretched into eternity by violence. The ocean floor shook, and the stars above trembled as the clash of titans burned into legend. At last, after what felt like endless war, both combatants collapsed in exhaustion. King Kong clung to a shattered cliff, bloodied but unbroken. Megalodon floated in the waves, its chest rising, one eye still locked on its foe. Neither could kill the other, but both had carved their power into the sea and sky. The battle would not end with death, but with legend. From that day forward, sailors whispered of the night the sea itself trembled. When King Kong and Megalodon clashed beneath the storm, they said the scars still marked the ocean floor, and the waves still carried echoes of their fury. One was king of the land, one of the sea. But together they had proven that when titans collide, the world itself must bow. The storm roared heavier above as King Kong pulled himself onto a jagged outcrop, every breath rasping with blood and salt. Below, the Megalodon circled slowly, one eye blinded but its hunger undiminished. The sea itself seemed to bow beneath its massive presence, waves crashing against Kong like fists, daring him to dive again. But the Titan beat his chest with defiance, a sound that boomed even above the thunder, a declaration that he would not yield, not even to the monster of the deep. The Megalodon surged upward, tail thrashing with fury, sending a geyser of foam into the sky as it lunged. Its jaws opened wide, teeth glinting like rows of swords, aiming to snap Kong in half with a single strike. But the giant ape leapt aside at the last moment, his fists slamming down onto the beast's head, each strike echoing like thunderclaps across the sea. Blood burst from the predator's gums, staining the water crimson. Yet still it fought, its rage as endless as the ocean it ruled. Dragged into the waves once more, King Kong grappled with the Leviathan beneath the surface. The pressure of the deep crushed against his lungs. But his fury was stronger than the drowning pull. He wrapped his arms around the shark's head, forcing its jaws apart, straining against muscles forged by millions of years of dominance. The Megalodon thrashed wildly, smashing its massive tail into reefs, shattering stone like brittle glass. But Kong would not let go, his roar reverberating even underwater. The Megalodon, desperate and enraged, slammed Kong into the ocean floor, burying him in clouds of sand and rock. For a moment, silence reigned, as if the ape had been broken. But from the murk, Kong burst free, clutching a jagged spear of coral in one massive hand. With a furious cry, he drove it into the shark's gills, twisting it deep. The water erupted with blood, and the predator screeched, a sound that shook even the whales in the distance. But injury could not end the fight. The Megalodon, bleeding heavily, coiled its immense body around Kong, crushing him like a serpent. Bones cracked under the pressure, his massive chest caving as the water churned into a deadly whirlpool. Yet Kong's eyes burned with defiance. With his last ounce of strength, he sank his own teeth into the beast's flesh, ripping scales away, his fists pounding into its side like hammers forged of rage. Above, lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos below as blood spiraled upward like smoke. The world itself seemed to bend under the fury of the two monsters, one born of the land, the other of the deep. The Megalodon dragged Kong upward, exploding through the surface in a fountain of blood and salt, both creatures crashing onto the waves, rolling in a death struggle that sent tidal waves racing outward. On and on they battled, every strike shaking the seas, every roar and screech echoing into the storm. The Megalodon's once perfect rows of teeth were shattered, its scales cracked and bleeding, but its tail still lashed with unstoppable force. King Kong's fur was torn, his muscles riddled with wounds, his breath ragged and shallow. But his fists never stopped pounding, his will never faltered. It was not just a fight, it was war incarnate. The waves grew monstrous, taller than cliffs, as though the ocean itself was rebelling against the chaos within it. Megalodon dove deep, pulling Kong with it, into blackness where even light could not reach. The Titan's lungs screamed, but his rage carried him on. He grabbed onto the beast's fin, climbing its body like a mountain, his fists hammering relentlessly against the predator's skull. The shark's screech echoed into the abyss. But still it swam, still it fought, still it refused to die. At last, they burst upward one final time, the storm above splitting with lightning as if to mark the climax of their war. Kong raised both fists high, bringing them crashing down onto the shark's head as they broke the surface. The ocean erupted like a volcano, water and blood exploding outward as the Megalodon writhed in agony. Yet even with its skull cracked and body broken, it lunged once more, refusing surrender. The battle stretched on, each moment etched into eternity, until at last the two titans slowed. King Kong, swaying with exhaustion, barely clung to the shattered reef. The Megalodon, drifting in the waves, one eye blind and gills torn, circled sluggishly, its body trembling with the weight of wounds. Both had fought with everything they had, both had bled oceans of blood. And both were shadows of the monsters they had been at the start. And then silence. The Megalodon, body quivering, sank slowly into the abyss, its shadow fading into the dark it had ruled for so long. King Kong raised his head to the storm, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds, and roared with defiance, a sound that carried across the seas, a proclamation that he had survived the ultimate battle. The ocean had not claimed him, the monster had not broken him, and his legend had grown to echo for all time. The storm did not ease as King Kong roared into the sky, his cry mixing with thunder like the voice of a god. His body dripped crimson into the waves, every cut and gash screaming with pain. But his spirit remained unbroken. Beneath him, the sea churned angrily, as though the ocean itself refused to let the ape claim victory over its champion. Then, in a flash of silver, the Megalodon surged upward once again, half dead but driven by a hatred that would not fade. Its body was broken, its eye blind, but its jaws still snapped with enough force to tear ships apart. The collision was apocalyptic. King Kong slammed both fists down on the shark's head just as the Megalodon snapped upward, their blows meeting in a spray of blood and foam. The reef shattered beneath them, jagged stones splitting as the sea buckled under their weight. The Titan screamed, his knuckles split open from striking bone. While the predator screeched, its jaw cracked wider with each blow. Yet even in this state, neither would surrender. Theirs was a battle that defied death itself. The Megalodon whipped its colossal tail, striking Kong across the chest with such force that the ape was thrown across the water like a broken ship, crashing into a cliff of stone. Rock crumbled into the sea, waves swallowing whole chunks of the island as the Titan pulled himself upright. Blood ran in rivers down his body, yet his chest still beat with defiance, his eyes burning like fire against the storm. He knew the sea wanted to bury him, but he would not be forgotten in silence. From below, the shark circled once more, its massive body cutting the ocean into violent spirals. The water boiled as the Megalodon gathered its final strength, launching upward with jaws wide enough to swallow Kong whole. The Titan met the charge with a roar, leaping into the air, his fists raised like hammers of the gods. They collided in midair, ape and shark suspended above the sea for a single, unforgettable heartbeat, before crashing down together in an explosion of foam and fury. The impact birthed a wave that raced to distant shores, swallowing trees and dragging creatures into the deep. The ocean itself seemed to cry out, a wounded beast echoing the fury of its champions. Beneath the spray, King Kong seized the Megalodon's broken jaw, forcing it wider, muscles tearing as he tried to snap the beast apart. The shark writhed, its tail smashing into Kong's side, breaking ribs with every strike. Both roared and screeched into the depths, each refusing to die, each too proud to yield. The abyss swallowed them once more. Darkness pressed against them, the deep crushing Kong's lungs. But he fought on, fists raining down like meteors upon the shark's bleeding skull. The Megalodon, half-dead yet unbroken, surged upward blindly, slamming Kong against jagged ridges of rock. Blood clouded the water into crimson fog. But still they fought, a nightmare brawl that turned the sea itself into a graveyard. As they rose again toward the storm, lightning split the sky, illuminating their battered forms. King Kong, one arm broken, fur soaked with blood, eyes glowing with fury. Megalodon, one eye gone, gills torn, jaws shattered. But its hunger still alive. They broke the surface like gods reborn, roaring into the thunder, their voices shaking the very horizon. This was no longer just a fight. It was the birth of legend, written by blood and storm. The Titan landed the next blow, his massive fist slamming into the shark's snout, cracking bone and snapping teeth like stone shards. But the Megalodon, even with its skull shattered, managed to sink its teeth into Kong's shoulder, dragging him down once more. They fell together into the black depths, coils of bubbles rising like smoke, their battle endless. It was not predator and prey anymore. It was war itself, raging in silence beneath the waves. On the ocean floor, amidst the ruins of ancient coral, the fight dragged on. King Kong hurled boulders into the shark's face, cracking its jaw further, while Megalodon slammed its body into him, each hit like a mountain crashing into another. Dust and rock swirled in the dark, as if the very earth was crumbling under the weight of their rage. Each creature bled rivers into the sea, and yet neither could finish the other. And so, when they finally rose again, they were shadows of themselves. Titans broken, gods reduced to beasts. When still alive, Megalodon floated weakly, its body heaving, while King Kong dragged himself onto a shattered reef, his chest torn, his arms limp. The storm quieted above, as though even the heavens were exhausted by their war. For a moment silence ruled the world. And then, at last, the shark sank slowly into the abyss, its body twitching, its eye dimming, leaving only blood and shadow in its wake. King Kong, trembling but alive, roared one final time into the empty sky. His cry was not one of victory, but of survival, a defiant declaration that he had faced the king of the deep and endured. The ocean would forever remember its champion. But the land now belonged to him, scarred but unbroken. And so the battle ended not with triumph, but with legend, a story etched into the bones of the earth and sea alike. The waves grew calmer, but the sea did not forget. Even as the Megalodon's vast body drifted downward into the black abyss, the water trembled, currents spiraling, as though the deep itself mourned the fall of its ancient king. King Kong clung to the shattered reef above, chest heaving, his eyes fixed on the endless dark below. His roar had silenced the storm. But the ocean whispered that this war would be remembered forever. As dawn broke, light spilled across the waves, painting them gold, though the waters were still streaked crimson from the blood of titans. King Kong rose slowly, his body battered and torn, muscles trembling with exhaustion. He pounded his chest one final time, the sound weaker now but still proud, declaring that the king of the land had survived the ocean's fury. But behind him, the horizon remained heavy with shadow, as if the sea itself plotted revenge. Far below, the megalodon's corpse settled among canyons of coral and stone, its jaw cracked wide, its once glowing eye dim. Sharks smaller and weaker circled cautiously, unwilling to approach the fallen ruler. Even in death, the beast commanded respect, its body a monument to the age of giants. But its spirit, fierce and unyielding, seemed to linger in the currents, as though the ocean still belonged to it. King Kong dragged himself onto the jagged cliffs of the shore, water streaming from his fur, his wounds staining the rocks red. He leaned heavily, his breath ragged. But his gaze remained steady. He had faced the deep and returned. His body bore scars of the sea, torn flesh, broken bones, shattered muscle. Yet he stood tall, for the battle had not claimed his soul. Birds circled above, their cries echoing in the quiet air, as if they too spread word of the battle. The jungle behind the cliffs stirred softly, watching its king return from the abyss. But even the trees seemed hesitant, as though they sensed the wrath of the ocean might not be finished. For though the megalodon was gone, its legend remained as heavy as the waves that beat against the shore. For hours, King Kong stood at the water's edge, staring out to sea. The surface shimmered innocently, as though nothing had happened. As he knew better, he could still feel the tremors of the deep, the weight of something ancient pulling at the horizon. He roared once more, the sound carrying not just defiance but warning. The ocean would remember. And so would he. Days passed. But the scars of the battle did not fade. King Kong limped through his jungle, every step heavy. But every scar a crown of survival. The creatures of the land moved aside when he passed, their eyes wide with awe. They could smell the salt and blood clinging to his fur, the mark of an ocean battle none had seen before. In him they saw not just a ruler, but a legend. Meanwhile, in the deep, silence reigned. Yet silence is never empty. The megalodon's fall created a void. And in that void, whispers of the abyss grew louder. Other predators stirred, sensing the weakness of the sea's throne. But none dared yet to rise, for the shadow of the fallen king still haunted the currents. And the memory of Kong's fists still echoed in the dark. One night, as the moon rose full, King Kong returned to the cliffs. He stood where blood and salt had mixed, looking down into the endless black. For a moment the water shimmered strangely, as if the megalodon's massive shadow moved beneath. His chest tightened, his fists clenched. But nothing surfaced. The sea remained calm, holding its secrets tight. He turned away. But he knew in his bones that the story was not finished. The world itself seemed to change after their clash. Storms grew harsher, waves taller, as though the ocean raged in grief. The land, too, trembled at times, quakes shaking the jungle where Kong ruled. Nature remembered the battle, carried it in its winds and tides, a story too vast to be contained. Creatures whispered it in their own ways, passing it down as myth, each version darker, larger, and louder than the last. But for King Kong it was no myth. It was carved into his very body. At night, when the wind howled through the jungle, he could still hear the hiss of the shark, the crack of bone, the endless pull of the sea. His dreams were not silent. They carried him back to the depths, back to the moment when jaws as large as mountains snapped toward him, back to the abyss where he had nearly drowned. He would wake roaring, fists pounding, shaking the very earth beneath him. In the abyss, where the megalodon's body lay broken, something stirred. Smaller sharks, emboldened by the silence of their master, feasted on its flesh, tearing away at the corpse of the ocean king. Yet even as they fed, they trembled, for the currents whispered of a spirit that refused to fade. The ocean held grudges, and the blood of the megalodon did not sink quietly into sand. It spread, it stained, it promised return. King Kong, standing beneath the jungle's canopy, tilted his head toward the sea whenever the winds shifted. His ears caught the voice of the waves, low and unrelenting, reminding him that peace was temporary. He growled softly to himself, pounding his chest once, not in pride but in readiness. If the sea sent another beast, he would face it. If the abyss rose again, he would not run. The clash had changed him forever. He was no longer just king of the jungle, but a warrior who had stood against the sea itself. Seasons passed, but the scars did not fade. The gouges in his flesh turned into pale ridges of memory. The shattered fur never regrew in places where the megalodon's teeth had torn. Yet these scars were not marks of weakness. They were armor of survival. Every creature that looked upon him knew what he had faced. The land respected him, the sea feared him, and the sky carried his legend in storms. And so the tale spread, not through words of men but through the rhythm of the earth itself. The waves carried it to distant islands, where creatures lifted their heads at night, sensing the echoes of titans. The wind carried it across continents, where even mountains seemed to whisper of a clash that shook the seas. The jungle roared it in every sound of the night, a hymn to the one who had fought and survived. But deep below, in the eternal darkness where no light reached, shadows gathered once more. The body of the megalodon lay still, but the ocean was not a grave, it was a cradle. And in that cradle, legends do not die. They wait, they evolve, they return.